Dr. Mike here. I don't need these glasses. I'm not reading right now. I got to tell you though, I'm look, I really got to sort of start styling myself, but I will. I'm going to take a shower in a little bit. It's just been the last few days, just having to come up for air. So I've been back from New York a couple weeks. We still just about at the point of mid-March here of 2025. I'm still on my New Year high. I mean, there's been definitely some highs and lows, just trying to get things figured out. But by the end of the month, I'll be going to the Secret Knock, secretknock.co in San Diego, then flying to Florida for a networking event, and then attending in Chicago, Podcast Evolutions. So, and these are all like huge events, and some dates sort of duplicated themselves over other events I would have gone otherwise, like a nightclub show in Las Vegas, and going to meet some gurus and getting their ideas on things. So just to sort of show I got a really cool book. This is the Dictionary of Theories. Now, I've had this for a long time, and no, I haven't read the book, but it's one of those books you turn. I guess we could do it right now. You turn to any page and you'll see something, because it's like condensation of all different types of theories. So if you like theories, we'll talk about what I call ecol. It's just the name I came up today. Hey, I like the way it's the first time I said it out loud. I just been thinking it. But ecol, that says something. I'm drmike.org, in case you're wondering. I'm very casual right now because, it's Saturday morning early, and I'm going to deck up a little bit and do some running around. Got to go to the bank, and then I'm going to check out a couple places, and then I still got to book my flight to these places I mentioned. It's a little bit of a brag, but I haven't traveled like that for quite some time. So I just turned to the Great Man Theory. This is totally by chance. Now, there's a bunch of theories here, stuff I wouldn't necessarily want to be spending time on. The graph theory, which is a mathematical theory where you connect all the points. And vertices, there's a new word. A mathematician's going to go, well, you don't know that word? Vertices, whatever. There's the Great Man Theory. So it's related to psychology, which I'm going to talk about, related to the ecol. And this is all happening just randomly, okay? So that was proposed by Robert Friedman Bales. And this states that all great historical events and achievements can be attributed to the effort of one individual considered a great man. So the theory opposes the naturalistic approach, which places greater emphasis on the environmental context of the said achievement. So in other words, I guess we're kind of experiencing it right now with Dashism or authoritarian figures, for whether it's Bolsonaro to Putin to a Trump, the perceived power. Now, this is not exactly what the talk was, but what I was going to frame things as. The ecol word I'm going to use is relating to this. So someone is perceived to be great, and obviously there has to be agreement among a certain number of people, or whether you call them the power elite, intellectuals, or the base. And the base being, I guess, the populace. So we can look at through history where, we've had these different type of figures come about, and to some degree, no matter who it is, I'm talking in Western cultures, particularly in our democracy, a political figure or leader has some kind of quality to it, whether it's a Ralph Nader to a Trump, or even thinking back in the day of Nixon, what was perceived, depending on what side of the aisle you were on, what you thought about that particular person. So with great man theory, we look to great figures, and we could perceive maybe Roosevelt or Kennedy, if you understand American history and the history of our political elections. Well, things, to me, in studying what I call Dashism now, which is my take on fascism, because this is a distorted political moment that we're having. And I'm not a political scientist, and fair game, being a social observer of things and having to look at a book on theories, you get things in mind and you want to contrast them to our current modern viewpoint on things. And Dashism is a word I came up with because, given the word analogy, Dash schism, so Dash schism means the divide, And there were periods in time, particularly the Reformation and going back in history of the churches fighting each other depending what denomination you were a part of. We're experiencing the divide, extreme polarity right now, and there's certainly effects and reverberations and after effects. So I came up with this word just really like less than a half hour ago, folks, and that's why I haven't shaved. Because I thought, well, I'll get on the camera now while it's fresh in my mind and do it, and then I'm going to start my weekend. Yay! You're watching drmike.org. If you're actually watching this in 5 minutes and 30 seconds, here we are, starting. I'm going to make that a note. The talk officially starts at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Dr. Mike, the social scientist. Okay, so I like to figure out strategies and ideas, number one, to better understand our own circumstances and to give us sort of a reality context. Now, again, reality being what we perceive it, but there is some kind of agreement, whether it is a collective illusion that we're all experiencing something that I'm defining as schism, or something else is going on. I want to just better understand it, and that is my purpose and role. Not like I got anything better to do other than launch my CEOdirectory.com project and start doing film reviews in semi-retirement. Well, all right, so DAS, so DAS, and then schism like fascism, right? So same lettering of fascism, just replace the F with D and you get dashism. So fascism, dashism. And this is a D grade before we get to the F. Some might argue already at the minus F stage, or even worse. No, we're not there quite yet. So let's kind of understand the dash schism. So whatever's happening, whether you blame algorithms or just stupidity, we're in a situation where the only things that get challenged is I've got nothing better to do, so let's create tariffs and things that make me look like I'm a genius of some sort. I've got some strategy that no contemporary thinker, whether he be an economist or someone who studies from the extreme right or the left, think anything that's going on makes any really sense. But is it really a distraction? So other things that really are, whether it's the behind the scenes puppet pulling of the strings or invested interest that say, hey, this is the distraction that's calling, where the attention goes on the division, while the other side, steals, does whatever they do in collusion or get their way for whatever the motivation, being that they do believe in the great man theory, or they're just taking advantage of a situation that they allied themselves with because their power interests are vested in it, because if you go against it, you're out. And, I look at the VLOG, vanity, anger, lust, attachment, and greed. I use a lot of acronyms. The VLOG is sort of a certain mindset that disorients, you could say, just this naturalness that goes into the division of Dash-schism that makes it a viable manipulation metasphere. So you either have an agreement to be a part of it, or you're just in it and you go along with it. In some cases, maybe you don't know better. But I would think that one is tying themselves to the interest of the greater power, given the advantage of the moment, that fits into vanity, anger, lust, attachment, and greed. So given that as a vector, I'm talking about an arena ratio field. I have an earlier talk on this at mikesmastermind.com, mikesmastermind.com, look for. I cover them all, from the VLOG, which is a part of a disassociation that is allowing this, you could say, Dashism existence, because one, I guess there's less critical thinking going on, at least in an intellectual capacity, to go, wait a minute, what's going on here? And we step out of our limitations to sort of examine things as social scientists, right? So if you go back to mikesmastermind.com, there'll be a number of titles. Our arena ratio fields is something I came up with a year and a half, 2 years ago almost. And just thinking that as I walk or around my neighborhood or think about different things in my mind, depending on how you want to categorize them or departmentalize them, there's something that I'm considering. And if you think about the vast range of things, like at a sports stadium, there is the arena. So the arena of possibilities is quite huge, and you can consider the population, whether you define what the arena is for you. Back in the Roman days, it would be a gladiator. I bet they weren't too glad to be aiders. I don't know. But what's going on now is that when you get people so polarized, you've now created a ratio in that arena. So you divided line, would be the yard line in football, or just sort of, where the net is playing tennis, you know, don't hit the ball against that. So the idea that, we're able to observe something and capture something interest in the arena that now we're paying attention to, that rationalizes. So it's a ratio of our attention that's either being purposely focused or divided. However, it's gone there because something's going on that's causing our attention, whether it be diverted or just, hey, find that interesting and let's talk about it. drmike.org. mikesmastermind.com being the podcast. So now we narrow it down to the field. So arena ratio of fields, the ARF, came to me in the sense I was already kind of conjecturing this idea of what I could hear this dog barking in the background, or not in the foreground actually, because I was walking that way and the dog had already seen or sensed me. So woof, woof, woof. So you think, well, a dog is being a dog and it's protecting its space, it's making itself known. This dog in particular, well, maybe in that day is playing, guard dog, but on other days, would roll a ball towards me because it wanted me to play with it. Good guard dog. So come on in the house. Let's have some fun. So I don't know, yeah. Stranger delight, stranger danger. I'm just kind of going silly there because I'm thinking, if a van pulled up and offered you, some candy and say, hey, I ain't stupid, you got to tell me what brand of candy that is first before I go in your van. What do you really got inside there? So, where people's considerations are at in the arena ratio field, the ARF, where I pay attention to a dog barking, wondering what it's thinking, but also understanding that something's now come into a field of attention, and how we're going to consider it becomes this ratio and how we consider it. So I often use the term, and I don't know where I originated it from, but this can go back to the 90s where I talked about reverberations. This is before I even called myself a social scientist, more of a spiritual student in a way of like, well, what's karma? Like, what do you mean you reap what you sow? What goes around comes around. You mean, what's that all about? So it's, there are repercussions to things, right? And I'm sure you've experienced in your life where, man, you created a life sentence, like you are in the doghouse for life for what you did or what you said, and does never seem to get out of it. You can never change it. And when you try, you get more sentences added to it. Do you know what I mean? So maybe you do. In some cases, it'll be like, wow, I can relate to it. On the other side of it is sort of like, wow, let's explain it. Let's explore it. I can't necessarily explain it. I can observe it. And in this social scientist capacity, I've come up with a CARES model that I'm really sort of formulating right now, and it's going to be added to that theory book at some point when they do a new version of it. And that's CARES. So could we develop a CARES model in our communication and our ability to relate as we are in this ARF together? You call it arena ratio fields, or this intimate metasphere, this atmosphere, or, you could say a broader functioning that we're in this world and we're examining things that we are living, some kind of reverberation and repercussions of decisions that were made either at the electorate level, electrolyte lemonade, at the electorate, people who voted, and whether things were rigged, which oftentimes there are attempts to steal elections that people believe in certain conspiracy theories, and that informs their reality. Now, we make the argument, the distinction, is it something that's critically thought out? Did they fact-check anything? Or is it just part of this reverberation, so of an echo field where I hear something repeated over and over, and as studies have shown, and I'm sure it's in the theory book somewhere, people do adopt certain beliefs, whether it's religious, and depending on what religion, right, and what informs that belief, and it could be part of your traditions, your upbringing. People say it's your culture, and I talk about this in Cringe. Really, I encourage you to check out cringefactors.com. You know the Cringe, right? So CRINGE, factors.com. And cringe factors are basically where we're so tied into our identity, ID, my acronyms, internal dialogue, that you're not even really aware of what it is you're saying to yourself that informs your noun reality. So we can now position this reality as being sort of made up, right? And yet there has to be some contours or a vector of things that there's commonality on, like how we name things and label things and how we consider them. So whether it's obeying the law or, a certain brand or what's trending in fashion, there is some kind of common narrative. So to examine it in this CARES model is understanding that by participating in this role of an observer or calling yourself a social scientist, no matter what the capacity would be, spiritually as a student, or being an astute in the way that you're working on a paper for school, or you're writing a book like myself. The current one is understanding phenomenology. If you don't know phenomenology, it's understanding the structures of experience, which just in itself is like... So the phenom is what I'm calling the book because I relate it to the here and now, and it is a phenomena. So, wow, it's like, this is pretty amazing when you consider everything that's going on. And it's a good attitude to have, not to be so wowed out that you check out. Of course, it's good to check out, but check out like what's going on. So you question things, you question this perceived reality, and understand the consciousness that might relate to it. And you can measure it by its quality of community contribution and quality of conversation. It's relating to its perceived sense of reality. And I call it a noun reality because what's known to most people is just people, places, and things. And a lot of us just running around in their head. So with this internal dialogue dynamic, the question is, are you aware of your ID, this internal dialogue? And so hence I wrote cringe factors, because to me, when people get locked into this false sense of identity, false character, mask they're wearing, that is what I call the morb, the modus operandi of rational behavior that now sort of speaks for you because you're not even aware of your internal dialogue, and now you're fronting this artificial persona. And I've lived that way as a as a former ex, you could say, pseudo new wave punk rocker in the 80s, you know, and whatever dimensions, whether later on as a motivation speaker, promoter, or you know, whatever dynamic. I've played a lot of different ways, and you know, in some ways still playing out, loving the gray wolf role with my my native friends and urban shaman. It's like Grey Wolf is a welcomed character in their world, so I just play it out by naturally being myself in whatever way I show up. So understanding these vectors kind of creates sort of a sense, whether it's a noun reality, the idea of being attuned to this internal dialogue. So I'm aware of my thoughts and words and actions to some degree at least, so that I know where I'm going with them. And if it's a pretense because I'm playing out a role or a character dynamic, I can catch myself. And yeah, it could be fun to play it out, but sort of like, what's the value of that? Am I deceiving them? What am I leading them to believe, and why? Relates to my other writing about the bideck. Now, the bideck is interesting because we are strictly talking about, in the book, theory of mind. There's so much written about that since the 70s. So theory of mind is basically understanding that if I have a sense of mind, I can only intuit, but at least imagine through this bideck, which I'm going to talk about, or a noun reality, what's perceived by you about people, places, and things. So what is this cloud, you know, that's filtering my, you know, mental mechanics? It's a good question, right? So, you know, we define things and we relate to each other. So it's called theory of mind, you know. How does one mind intuit the mind of another person that's going to then dictate or inform their thinking, the quality of the words they're using, how they're going to act? So there's going to be some basis of identity that I also talk about in the ego. This is my theory of, I've named the selfie of the mind. So for often, if we're not aware of our internal dialogue, there's also a projection of whether it be this character mask, this morb, which I'm about to talk about. This is basically the perceived self, you know, that's made up. It's my self-image made real to myself, which is an illusion. So the ego is basically me naming the selfie of the mind, which to me is like, wow, it's like, why hasn't that been named before? Now we could say it's the self-imagining the self. Yeah, well, let's understand this mind mechanic process, because I'm taking action. There's some kind of momentum or motive here that's sort of in this realm. And I think it's interesting. If you look at psychology, sociology, philosophy, it's like there's never been a take on this, because it's so obvious that we imagine ourselves in this realm. And some people are going to say, well, now you're getting into quantum consciousness. Well, I wish. However, the current book on Phenom, P-H-E-N-O-M, book.com, is understanding how we are in this phenomena of imagining ourselves in an experience, which is also imagined. Yet there are things that are taken real, and whether it's a collective agreement of an illusion, and we've accepted it as real, whether you're naming the days of the week and saying, well, this is a common agreement around us because it only exists among us, like money, that there's an agreed perceived value to this greenback. So this element, this collective illusion, and you could say belief system, lends itself on some level to what I describe as the mass trance. And so one begins with this projection of an artificial identity that we believe is real in a world that's made up, which is called the Weltschloss, W-E-L-T slosh. So the two German words, Welt being the world, and the slosh being what we've constructed in this, you could say, artificial world. Even if we relate to nature, what we've done to it, and what is our natural setting between us, is an examination of the quality of dwelling, which really truly makes my work an ontology. What I mean by ontology is it's you could say, the branch of philosophy of its own way of understanding existence. I want to qualify something to where we are considering states of enlightenment related to existence and qualifying it in being. How are we, what I describe as ultra being present, at least the potential to be present to each other in such a way as a gift that sort of opens up all the vectors and releases the ARF, and you wake up out of the mass trance, masstrance.com. So what would this sense be? It's an ultra being. Now again, I speak sort of as an observer, a social scientist. At least I make the claim, not the claim that I'm any type of guru or I get it. I'm looking at something, well, I get what I can in the observation of things, and whether I filtered it through to get it deep enough, I'm formatting concepts and ideas, and it's theory and conjecture, into a model that we can study to reveal this mind matrix and the mechanics of the way this morb character that lives in the mass trance exists and the quality of its existence or being. So the morb is modus operandi of rational behavior, and you can find that writing at morb.masstrance.com. So morb.masstrance.com. And the same thing with BIDEC, so BIDECK.masstrance.com. And there are distinctions, although they relate to each other. So the BIDEC, again, is this, you could say it's the memory cloud and how we relate to filtering things. So at least in this process for theory of mind and for this identity to be expressed, this internal dialogue, to reckon with itself, which it has itself thought out and secure enough in its dimension to express itself and have this identity, whether it's aware that, it's TWA of its own thinking process and choice of words deliberately in the way it's showing up and acting, its act, what it's actualizing, is the consideration of the phenom and how I am existing in the here and now. So phenombook.com. A lot of .coms thrown at you, but I'm hoping that some are, catching it and go, oh, that's the one I was looking for, or wow, that's interesting. Because my goal for me is to have these enlightened, conscious community conversations among us, whether it's online or in a group of friends, or we get together once in a while for a conference and talk about precepts like Guy Finley's work on self-liberation, Krishnamurti on the observer being observed, and Deepak being a bit more in the gap, that this is some sort of visionary onboarding. And in this, you could say, unfoldment process, we delight because we are really examining concepts that in their own way are profound, that hopefully lead to an awakening, at least out of the mass trance and some kind of a freedom out of morbidity. So the MORB, modus operandi of rational behavior, being a bit more aware of its ID internal dialogue, is sort of self-liberation, at least in my theory, of being able to let it go, as you would say, Guy. So it's a lot of concepts thrown all together, and yet it fits in some kind of, you could say common ground that once deciphered informs this CARES model. So the CARES simply is living a life of conscious community action, research, because what is the best way? What's the conduit? How can I be the delight at the end of the tunnel and engage and participate in life, in the way that I can fit in and serve, and less so disrupt, although really at the heart of it, it's like, I call it the REC formula. So again, if you go to mikesmastermind.com, that I put together by observing many elements of experiences that I had in the phenomenon, observing what I considered really great masters, teachers of the moment. Not that any were perfect in any full degree, but yet there was excellence and some level of mastery that was displayed that you could observe as being the social scientist in this CARES model, because I'm engaging in life as a form of community action, hopefully in the way that I'm a delight when I show up. People feel like some sense of relief, or if there's something to work through or deal with, they have the support and some kind of methodology, whether it be ego therapy or just being able to contemplatively be at ease. And the rec formula is being really warm and welcoming, real, relatively, relatable, and appreciating that people have the right to be here, honoring their rights and how they think things are right or wrong. And in this way, they have a lot of ease, and the ease is the gateway to enlightenment. If you want to educate or enlighten, make it easy. Otherwise, if you don't have ease, you're going to have what? So we want to stop dis and the disassociation as we can, and this is part of that rec formula, that we take conscious consideration for the company that we keep. Consideration is such an important word. We could talk about compassion and things and feeling things, but showing consideration really is, for the company you keep, making sure their needs and interests are met, that they feel they're being heard, that they're being considered, is a high value. And you could say the kings and the queens, on the K element, sort of vitamin K, is that they remain kind, no matter what the challenge is. Yeah, there might be that moment, but they were conscious of it and they were in control. And where there might have been an immediate reaction, things got cleaned up and solutions, like it was over, and there wouldn't be so much of this reverberation. So kindness rules the day. So in understanding these ideas and principles, we can put something into the space that at least catches things in the appreciation of a few dynamics here in the ratio, arena ratio field, that something has been put in motion. You could say, well, it's your presence. It's how you observe things in a scientific realm, that's going to affect the dynamic, particularly if you choose to evolve it. And the best way to evolve it is to let it work itself out. Sometimes, because of the sentiment or the urgency, there are interjections, right, where you have to act. It's an emergency. And we may not always know the best way to respond. And some people freak out. And the more that we can help people feel centered, and in the way that they can observe the observation of things in this ego or the phenom, they'll have a better grasp of the here and now in the way that they can take a breath, and we're not adding to the dimension of disassociation or anything that would be negative. And if there was something that had to be dealt with, there would be the search for equilibrium, equity, in the way that we each have a whole brain consideration. There's fairness that's present, and we're loving in the way that we have these conversations. So lovingconversations.com. To me, these are important considerations, because if we're going to format truly something that would be a self-liberation movement, and if there was this lofty goal of uplifting humanity, how would we go about it? So the CARES model, CARES, is community action of research, community action research. And it qualifies itself on engagement. What is the quality of enlightened engagement, if we can consider it? What would be its qualities? And again, there might be always the contrast. And again, in the mass trance, it's always going to be sort of the dimension of where I am also stuck in, that now wants to see out of the vector, which is to think out of the box. And yet we have to consider the quality of the box itself, where the beingness in stuck states, which is part of the wealth slosh, right? The world that I'm dwelling in. And the reality is, that there's a certain aspect that in many ways shows up that we could define as a quality. What's the quality, of life? This dimension of being. When I say, it's like, your own states, and a lot of it is judged, or, there's hesitancy perhaps. If we look at participatory action research here, it's every day, it's ongoing. On my own lived case study, the examination of the ego itself reveals this to be true, because I'm projecting in some sort of way a perceived sense of I. And how it's come about is the way that I'm choosing to see it, that now is acting out in this, what do you call it, false consciousness or character mask. Let's examine this. If we don't understand the basics of how we're seeing through our own lens of perception and awareness, of having some sense of what is it that I'm thinking, and am I clear about it, or am I existing in a repeated, process I call RTPs, repeated thought patterns? So the only way I can awaken to it is to be aware of what it is that I'm thinking. What are the quality of words that I'm saying that are preventing me from moving forward? I see so much procrastination where someone thinks of an idea, and then there might be questions of self-worth, or, gee, do I want to work with that person? They might help me out, but they're going to charge me some money maybe, or they're going to steal my idea. And these irrationales continue to reverberate. So it's catching these RTPs and understanding there are repercussions. The longer we stay in the mass trance, particularly when we know better, to not go into the repeated thought pattern, to not say the thing that's going to upset the person and cause a prion activation, PRYONS.com. Prions are things that are sort of like entity actions, like you activate them and then people go into the same old story over and over again. And you know better than you should have said that or referenced that person or did the thing that you know it's going to upset them, but you did it. Some people have really, other than conscious awareness of the words they use, and they reinforce life sentences on people, that they reverberate in their minds, their sense of stupidity or limitation. And there's this constant artificial wall that, if it's a conscious construction of something, then why do we keep it up? So we have to be a bit more aware of these repercussions. So this echo element, I think, conceals something to where if we can begin to recognize our own RTPs, repeated thought patterns, to become a bit more eye-aware, and beginning with sense of self, like what's my posture on things, like, and I can tell right away through my body ecology and embodiment, right? What is it, that I'm feeling, having a sense of things, and checking in my shoulders and breathing, facial contours, and my relationship to you, like what am I expressing? It's like, have some awareness. Now we can begin in the way that I can appreciate everything about you in this moment. If there's going to be a frontal cortex lighting up, an enlightenment process, let's move forward in this dimension. And we can share. And I never want to make anybody wrong, otherwise there's sort of like the intention that where a person's not thought out, or there's just the vlog again, acting from vanity, anger, attachment, and greed. I left out the lust because it becomes a later thing, so late in life, letting go. We need to let things go, and if we're going to have self-liberation. And if we could format this as a movement, I believe we can accelerate and accentuate an actualization of a lived model that becomes this beacon, this delight at the end of the tunnel, just simply in the way that you show up. And you let people have those experiences. However, if you could say there's any contrast at all, there's a light being shown on it, and a delight. And we can call this perhaps bringing attention to concepts of thus that are not so lofty. They're easy and they're enlightening. If we're going to define it as such, then we create this CARES model, and this becomes sort of action research that examines this quality of engagement and how we move forward in this, on this level. This is the consideration. So I'm hoping you, as fellow social scientists, get it, that we get out of the stuck stage. And if we can conceive it, and we can contrast it with something, and whether any of the domains, the .coms I've mentioned in the writing, and you can get a platter if you love the philosophy of it, of ultra being, go to grandtourideas.com, grandtourideas.com. Otherwise, I'm drmike.org. I'm just presenting ideas. It's not just to format myself as being some kind of know-it-all, look at the way I'm dressed, being very casual. I'm just saying, hey, if there's something profound here for you, and we're looking through a breakthrough because you're concerned, as I am, about where we are in our community contributions and our level of conscious conversation, how else are we going to attain a breakthrough? These are serious questions to consider. Why aren't we having more conscious community conversations and not leaning on me or somebody else to go, well, that's your idea, Mark. Yeah, I want to help put it together. Are you going to support me by showing up? Do you have a paper or want to help me in some regard? Like, introduce me to the publishing world, or, involve me in a conference. I'm talking to you, the intellectual community, that a lot of people in the academic world, I've emailed people and there's a couple of emails and all of a sudden you get ghosted. Did I say something wrong? Or is it something you're challenged by it? Or you're just too busy that you can't communicate? Or is there a loftiness that people, in whatever role or dimension they perceive themselves by title or rank in life, that they frown on others? And we all do it. I mean, when I confront somebody, depending on what their cringe perceived level is, just the fact that somebody can act out a robotic level, for me, I'm curious, because it's sort of like, well, here's a role model I can study. So to me, though, is also, though, there's the rank and file. We've put people in sort of categories, and now we respond to them as such. Can there be any self-liberation from our conjecture and treatment of how we perceive the other, also to how I am to myself regarded, my own internal dialogue? If you go to my other website, it's the latest Gemini LMS. I'm still fascinated by it. I'd say it's 80%, really right on. But it does capture 80% of the essence of what I'm talking about. Just go to aboutme's.com. Eventually that website will be the different dimensions of Grey Wolf, Mike Rich, and this Dr. Mike character currently, this avatar, drmike.org. Go to aboutme's.com. There'll be a link, cross-link on those pages because they are the same website, but you can hear it. And then check it out for yourself. I ask you to do a little bit of a deep dive, to go down the rabbit hole with me a little bit, just in the consideration of the possibility that there is something for us to conceive, whether it be conscious community conversations that invite others and lends us to a movement in itself so that these ideas are at least considered and can go viral, in the opposite way of communicable dis-ease. This becomes sort of sense of, self-liberation, a friendship fellowship. We take it to the next level. friendshipfellowship.com. These are just ideas for consideration. I'm drmike.org. Join me in evolving and informing a proactive, conscious